Mark Carney just walked into a room with Donald Trump, got called pathetic, and if the internet is to be believed, walked back out, having publicly dismantled the most dominant speaker in American politics in under 12 seconds. Whether that specific exchange happened exactly the way it has gone viral is something we are going to get into honestly, because the truth here is more interesting than the clip. What is confirmed, documented, and already reshaping North American trade is the biggest story, and your energy bill, your job security, and the relationship between the two largest trading partners on the planet are all sitting right in the middle of it. The numbers being thrown around online: 180 million views, 11 seconds of Trump silence, stock markets dropping because of a press conference moment. Those demand scrutiny before we repeat them. But the underlying diplomatic war those numbers are trying to describe, that part is very real, very documented, and moving faster than most people realize. Let's start with what we actually know, because this story does not need exaggeration to be significant. Mark Carney became Canada's Prime Minister in March 2025 after winning the Liberal Party leadership on a platform that was, in large part, a direct response to Donald Trump's tariff campaign and his repeated suggestions that Canada could become the 51st state of the United States. Carney is not a career politician in the traditional sense. He ran the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. Then he ran the Bank of England through Brexit, two of the most economically volatile moments in recent Western history. The man does not panic under pressure. That fact matters enormously for understanding what is happening right now. Since Trump re-entered the White House, his administration has imposed a sweeping series of tariffs on Canadian goods: steel, aluminum, lumber, auto parts, and agricultural products among them. These are not minor trade friction points. They are economically aggressive moves targeting industries that employ hundreds of thousands of workers on both sides of the border. Canada has been pushing back, retaliating with counter-tariffs of its own, and Carney has made his position public and blunt. Canada is not for sale. And Canada is not a subordinate partner that will quietly absorb economic punishment while nodding politely. That is the verified backdrop. That is the real war. Now let's talk about the moment everyone is sharing. Here is the version circulating across social media platforms and YouTube channels with escalating view counts. According to this version, during a joint press event between Trump and Carney, Trump called Canada's trade position pathetic. Carney then paused and, in 41 words across 3 sentences, delivered in roughly 12 seconds, reminded Trump that Canada supplies a significant portion of American energy needs, is a frontline military ally, and represents the kind of strategic partnership the United States simply cannot replace with a tariff and a press release. Trump, according to this version, said nothing for 11 seconds. The clip is presented as a communications masterclass: calm over outrage, precision over volume. Facts deployed like a surgical instrument against someone who usually wins by filling every inch of available air with noise. Now here is the part where we have to be straight with you, because that is the job. After examining verified mainstream reporting, Reuters, Associated Press, CBC, CTV, and available official government transcripts, the specific details of this exchange as described in the viral version have not been confirmed through those sources. The exact quote attributed to Trump, the exact 41-word Carney response, the precise timing, and especially the downstream claims, markets dropping 280 points because of a press conference moment, 9 parliaments quoting the exchange, 4 governments requesting Canada's communication strategy, none of that is backed by named sources, documented footage, or verifiable reporting at the time of writing this script. What that means is this: the specific viral version may be an embellishment of a real exchange, a selectively edited moment, or a narrative built on top of a genuine tension that absolutely exists. The internet does this constantly. Something real happens. It gets packaged, dramatized, and turned into a 12-second hero moment with a countdown timer overlaid on it. Then it gets shared 100 million times because it gives people the emotional release of watching someone they admire stand firm against someone they fear or resent. That emotional need is completely understandable, but you deserve more than a viral frame. You deserve the full picture. Here is what makes this story genuinely significant even without the specific viral details. The broader dynamic that exchange is meant to represent is fully real, completely documented, and arguably more consequential than any single press conference moment in either country's recent history. Canada and the United States are locked in the most serious bilateral trade confrontation in decades. Trump's tariff campaign against Canada has been framed by his administration as leverage, a tool to extract better trade terms, reduce the trade deficit, and force Canadian alignment on immigration and border security. But from where Ottawa stands and from where Carney stands specifically, these tariffs are not just economic pressure tactics. They are a direct challenge to Canadian sovereignty, and that requires a response that is firm, clear, factual, and completely unemotional. Carney has repeatedly and publicly stated that Canada will not cave to economic intimidation. He has called for Canada to diversify its trade relationships, to reduce its deep structural dependence on the United States, and build serious new commercial ties with Europe, Asia, and the broader Indo-Pacific region. This is not just political posturing for domestic audiences. Canada's economy is among the most heavily US-integrated economies in the world. Roughly 75% of Canadian exports flow south to American consumers and businesses. That dependence, built over decades of careful economic policy and geographic proximity, is now functioning as a vulnerability, and everyone in Ottawa knows it. This situation is moving fast. By the time most mainstream coverage assembles the full picture of what this confrontation actually means for North American supply chains, energy markets, and the broader global trading order, the most important decisions will already have been made. Subscribe to this channel now so you are ahead of this story, not catching up to it after the consequences have already landed. Now let's get into the part of this story that does not need a viral clip to be alarming. One of the most important verified facts in this entire confrontation is the one that the viral narrative correctly identifies, even if the delivery around it is dramatized. Canada is a major energy supplier to the United States, and that relationship runs deep in ways most people have never had to think about before. Canada is by a significant margin the largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the United States. Canadian oil, much of it produced in Alberta, flows south through a network of pipelines every single day. American refineries, particularly in the Midwest, are not just accustomed to Canadian heavy crude, they were specifically built and engineered to process it. You cannot flip a switch and replace that supply. Retooling a refinery to process a different grade of crude takes years of engineering work and costs billions of dollars. This is not a political talking point, it is a physical and industrial reality. Beyond oil, Canada exports natural gas, electricity, and uranium to the United States. Northern states, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, Vermont, and others depend on Canadian electricity crossing the border as part of their normal grid operations. None of this tends to show up prominently in American tariff discussions because it is inconvenient. The political message is we are punishing Canada for bad trade behavior. The physical and economic reality sitting underneath that message is we are also structurally dependent on Canada for things we cannot easily replace or even quickly replicate domestically. This is the factual foundation of the argument Carney has been making throughout this confrontation, regardless of the exact words or the exact moment attributed to him in any viral clip. The core argument is straightforward. Before you characterize Canada's trade position as weak, understand that this trade relationship runs in both directions, and some of what flows from north to south is not optional for the American economy. The military dimension of this relationship is equally documented and equally significant. Canada is a founding member of NATO. Canadian and American armed forces train together, operate together, and have fought alongside each other in every major Western military conflict for the past century. Canada is a core partner in NORAD, the Joint North American Aerospace Defense Command, which monitors North American airspace and provides the continent's first line of defense against missiles and aerial threats. There is no functional American version of NORAD without Canada. This is not ceremonial, this is operational, daily, and foundational to American continental security. Carney's government has committed to increasing Canadian defense spending, a specific point on which Canada and the Trump administration actually share common ground. But Carney's framing of that commitment is deliberately and explicitly positioned as investment in Canadian sovereignty and independent capability, not as tribute paid to avoid American displeasure. That distinction is not a minor rhetorical nuance.
It is the difference between a subordinate relationship and a partnership between sovereign equals, and Carney has made clear which one he believes Canada is entitled to.
Even if the 12-second exchange, as described in the viral version, is not confirmed by original footage, the communications approach that exchange is meant to illustrate is a documented and consistent pattern in how Carney has actually engaged this confrontation since day one in office. Carney does not shout back, he does not match Trump's volume, he does not take personal attacks personally, or at least he does not show it. He uses facts, maintains composure, and keeps redirecting the conversation back to Canada's actual leverage and genuine strategic value. This is deliberate. Anyone who has watched Carney's press conferences and public statements since taking office will see the pattern immediately. He is not performing steadiness. He is a central banker who managed two of the world's most important financial institutions during periods of maximum systemic stress, and he approaches diplomatic pressure the same way he would approach a currency crisis, with composure, precision, and a clear-eyed understanding of exactly where the real leverage lies. Whether or not Trump was literally silent for 11 seconds at a specific press event, the broader communication contest between these two leaders is very real, and by most credible assessments, Carney has not blinked once. Now let's look at the American side of this, because American viewers watching this confrontation deserve an honest account of what is actually driving it. Trump's tariff campaign against Canada has a political logic that is largely separate from its economic logic. Tariffs applied to the closest ally and largest trading partner the United States has are not primarily about correcting a trade imbalance, they are about political messaging. They signal toughness and economic nationalism to a domestic audience that has been told consistently that trade deals, particularly deals negotiated before Trump's presidency, have cost American workers jobs and leverage. Whether those specific workers benefit in any measurable way from Canadian tariffs is, frankly, beside the political point. The optics are the product. But the economic side effects are real, and American consumers and businesses are already absorbing them. Tariffs on Canadian lumber are raising the cost of new home construction at a moment when housing affordability is already at historic lows for American families. Tariffs on Canadian steel affect American manufacturers who use that steel as a direct input cost. Tariffs on auto parts complicate supply chains that have been integrated across the Canada-US border for decades under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the trade deal Trump himself negotiated and celebrated in his first term. American automakers build their vehicles using components that physically cross the Canada-US border multiple times before the finished car rolls off the assembly line. Disrupting that chain does not just hurt Canada, it raises costs and creates delays for American workers and businesses in the exact industries Trump has historically championed. So when American voters and consumers are trying to understand why prices are not falling despite political promises, part of that answer runs directly through this tariff confrontation with the neighbor directly to the north. For Canadians watching this unfold, the story has a dimension that goes beyond the economics. There is a psychological and national identity element to this confrontation that should not be underestimated by anyone trying to read where Canada goes from here. The suggestion that Canada could or should become the 51st American state, whether Trump means it as a literal policy goal, a negotiating pressure tactic, or a provocative joke that reveals an actual attitude, has activated a level of Canadian national identity and political unity that has not been this visible or this broadly felt in a generation. Carney's approval numbers rose after he took a public and firm stance against Trump's economic pressure. Canadians who might otherwise have reservations about liberal economic policy broadly agreed that standing firm against trade coercion was not a partisan position, it was a national one. Do you think Canada is right to push for economic independence from the United States, or does reducing that integration ultimately cost both countries more than it protects either one? The relationship between these two economies is not a zero-sum competition. It was never designed to be. But the question of how much dependence is too much, and who holds the real leverage when that dependence gets weaponized, is one that both countries need to answer honestly. Leave your take in the comments. This is a conversation that deserves more than a 12-second countdown clock. Carney's push to diversify Canadian trade has found real traction beyond the rhetoric. Canada has been actively deepening its economic engagement with the European Union and Indo-Pacific partners since this confrontation began. These are not overnight solutions. The degree of Canada-US economic integration that exists today took decades of deliberate policy to build, and it does not come undone in months or even years. But the strategic direction has shifted in Ottawa, and it is being driven by a genuine institutional belief that overdependence on any single trade partner, particularly one that has now demonstrated a clear willingness to weaponize that dependence as political leverage, is a national security vulnerability that Canada can no longer afford to leave unaddressed. The international context around all of this matters more than most individual news cycles have space to explain. Trump's tariff campaign has not been applied to Canada alone. It has been deployed simultaneously against the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, and a wide range of other trade partners across the globe. The cumulative effect of those deployments has been to accelerate a process that was already quietly underway. A growing number of countries, including long-standing American allies, are diversifying their supply chains, their reserve currency holdings, and their strategic trade relationships, specifically to reduce their exposure to the risk of American economic pressure. This is not anti-American in any ideological sense. It is rational risk management. If you are a finance minister in Berlin, Seoul, or Tokyo watching a close American ally like Canada get hit with major tariffs while being told it might as well join the United States, you begin recalculating. You begin asking how exposed your own economy is to American leverage, and you begin making moves to reduce that exposure before it gets used against you. The United States was the architect of the global trading system built after World War II. That system gave the dollar its reserve status, gave American businesses access to global markets on favorable terms, and gave Washington enormous diplomatic leverage rooted in economic interdependence. Every time tariffs are deployed against allies, not adversaries, allies, that system erodes slightly. The question that serious analysts and policymakers are now openly asking is whether those individual erosions are adding up to a structural shift in how the global economic order is organized. If they are, the consequences for American workers, American investors, and the American standard of living are long-term significant and very difficult to reverse once the pattern is established. Here is what remains genuinely uncertain, and this story demands we name that clearly, rather than fill the uncertainty with confident-sounding speculation. We do not know the precise content of the private exchanges between Trump and Carney that are not on camera. We do not know whether the specific viral exchange circulating online occurred in the form being described, and until original press footage, official transcripts, or verified reporting from Reuters, Associated Press, CBC, or equivalent sources confirms or clarifies that exchange, treating the specific viral details as confirmed is not responsible journalism. That matters because when unverified moments are treated as fact and shared as evidence of real political consequences, it undermines the credibility of the very real and documented story happening in the background. We do not know how far the Trump administration is willing to push the tariff confrontation with Canada before the domestic economic costs create enough political pressure to pull back. Historic patterns around tariff campaigns suggest there is usually a pain threshold, a moment when prices at the grocery store and layoffs at the factory become visible enough that political calculation shifts. But the timeline on that threshold is genuinely unpredictable. We do not know whether Carney's diversification strategy can move fast enough to meaningfully reduce Canadian economic dependence on the United States within a politically relevant window. Structural economic change is measured in years and decades, not in press conference moments or viral clips. Several scenarios are possible from here, and none of them are simple. The most constructive scenario is that ongoing diplomatic engagement through formal trade negotiation channels and the kind of back-channel conversations that never make it to social media produces a framework deal that reduces or eliminates the most economically damaging tariffs in exchange for Canadian commitments on areas like border security, defense spending, or regulatory alignment. Carney has publicly stated he is willing to negotiate. He has also made equally clear that negotiation does not mean capitulation, and that the two things are not the same no matter how much pressure is applied. A second scenario is a prolonged standoff that gradually accelerates Canada's strategic shift, making the economic relationship with the United States progressively less dominant within a broader, diversified set of Canadian trade partnerships. This scenario ultimately serves Canada's long-term strategic independence, but it comes with real friction costs in the near term for workers and businesses on both sides of the border who depend on the integrated North American economy functioning smoothly. A third scenario, the one that neither government publicly wants and that market analysts are quietly building into their risk models, is a further escalating exchange of retaliatory measure that spreads beyond goods tariffs into services, energy agreements, financial access, and potentially security and intelligence cooperation frameworks. Nobody wins in that scenario. The integrated nature of the North American economy means that a serious rupture in the Canada-US trade relationship does not just hurt Canadians. It hits American consumers, businesses, and workers in ways that are direct, measurable, and politically uncomfortable for whoever is seen as responsible. The world is watching how this plays out, not merely because Canada and the United States are individually important, but because the way two deeply integrated, deeply aligned, long-trusted democratic allies navigate this confrontation is a live case study for how the new global trade environment handles American pressure against its closest partners. The answer to that case study will shape how dozens of other countries make their own calculations about how close to stay to Washington and what it cost them to do so. If you are watching this and thinking this story is bigger than the viral clip made it look, you are right. The most consequential shifts in global power and economic order rarely arrive with clean headlines and tidy summaries. They arrive through a series of confrontations and decisions that only reveal their full significance in retrospect. Our job here is to give you the context, the honest uncertainty, and the structural analysis that lets you see where this is going before it gets there. Subscribe to this channel because what we do here is the full picture, not the headline, not the viral moment, not the version that fits cleanly into 12 seconds. So where does this leave us? The core of what we know is this: Canada and the United States are in a serious, documented, and economically consequential trade confrontation. Whatever the exact details of any specific press conference moment, Canada's approach to this confrontation, measured, factual, sovereignty-grounded, and rooted in real economic leverage, is being watched closely by governments on every continent that are currently doing their own calculations about American pressure and their own dependence on American goodwill. The viral version of this story is built on a genuine foundation, even if the specific dramatic details are unverified. But here is the question this story opens that we have not fully answered yet. If Canada successfully reduces its economic dependence on the United States, not just in rhetoric but in actual trade flows, energy exports, and supply chain structure, what does that actually do to the American economy on the ground? Not in theory, in the specific states, specific industry, and specific communities that depend more on Canadian imports, Canadian energy, and Canadian supply chains than most American voters have ever had reason to know. The analysis on that side of the border is not what you would expect, and it changes how you see this entire dispute. In my next video, I am covering exactly that, and what I found will shift where your attention goes the next time you hear the word tariff.